Well, this week, Sir Keir Starmer described the Conservative leadership race as a travelling circus. He also criticised the candidates for promising billions of pounds of unfunded tax cuts. Labour's chosen to focus on tax cuts of a different kind, with a pledge to get rid of the charitable status held by some private schools and then reinvest that money in state education. Well, the Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson joins us now. Thank you for being with us. I just want to start off by talking about the heatwave. It's something that so many of our viewers are going to be really concerned about. The government is keen to keep schools open. We spoke to Dominic Raab earlier on the programme, who said it's important that children don't miss school. What's your position on this? Would you support schools that do decide to close in the heat?
I think head teachers are usually the best people to decide what's right in the particular circumstances of their school. And, closing schools should be a last resort. Of course it should be. I think what we've seen, however, over the last 12 years is a failure to get our schools into the best possible state to deal with these kinds of problems. That applies when you have very hot weather, but it also applies where you have very cold weather. And we've got a crumbling schools estate and a government that's failed to invest over the last 12 years in making sure that our schools are fit for the future.
A lot of parents will be, facing the decision about whether to send their children into school on, Monday or Tuesday, particularly Wednesday, and when the heat is so high. Would you support parents who decide to keep their children off school on those days?
I'm sure that head teachers will be doing everything they possibly can to make sure that their school's kept as cool as possible, that children are kept out of the hot sun and are kept indoors as much as possible. I think children have missed out quite a lot already in terms of their education, and it's right for them to be there.
Trust the head teacher, basically.
They will always act in the best interests of the children in the school.
We just spoke to Mick Whelan a moment ago, who, of course, is the head of the ASLEF union, one of a number of unions who are going on strike. Do you back the train driver strikes?
We don't want the strikes to go ahead. We didn't last time, and I would certainly want further strikes to be avoided, because whenever you get to a position where you have a strike, that represents a failure of all of the parties to reach an agreed position. What we saw with the Transport Secretary, of course, is that he refused consistently to get around the table to try and find a way through it, because this is about, cost of living, about the rising pressures that workers are facing, and also about safety on our railways. I mean, whether there's any question now, given the chaos that we're seeing in government, about the Transport Secretary or whoever that might be in a couple of weeks, doing the right thing and being responsible in terms of getting around the table, I think that remains to be seen.
It's interesting. I've spoken to quite a lot of union leaders over the last few weeks, and it's a pretty consistent message about Labour. They're frustrated, effectively, that Labour isn't doing more to support them in strike action. They say that Labour needs to demonstrate that it's a party that's on the side of working people. Can you understand that frustration?
I understand the pressures that working families and workers across a range of different parts of our economy are feeling right now. We know that wages have been stagnant for many, many years. We know that everything is more expensive, and that means really hard times for people that do incredibly important jobs, whether that's our teachers, staff on the railways. I think what the trade unions would recognise is that from government, Labour had a really strong record of making sure that we did support all of our staff in those key industries, and that's what we do again.
You mentioned teachers there, who, of course, have seen pay squeeze for many years now with austerity as well. Teachers are considering strike action. Would you support them in that?
Well, I really hope it doesn't come to that. As I understand it, the review body will be presenting to ministers what their recommendations are. I'm not going to cut across that process, but I think, as you say, when you look at the real terms pay cuts that teachers have had over the last 12 years, the pressure that they're under, the fact that they've worked so hard during the pandemic and have not been recognised by the government. I think it's also important, however, to mention school support staff who have had a really difficult time, are so important to our children getting the support that they need in school. And of course, one of the leadership candidates was incredibly dismissive, talked about superfluous support staff. I don't know what planet she's living on if she thinks we've got too many staff in our schools supporting children.
Are you talking about
those? Well, Kemi Badenoch was very dismissive of our school support staff, but right across, Nadeem Zahawi, the new Chancellor, the former Education Secretary, he's been saying we should have 20% cuts across government departments. I presume that extends to education as well.
I think that he was clarifying that the 20% cut was to civil servants, not the spending on all government departments.
Well, that has a massive impact. Who does he think will be responsible for delivering on government priorities at the moment, for example? I'm inundated with people who can't get a passport to go on holiday. Who does he think is responsible for making sure that people across the country can get a passport and can get a well-deserved break?
We were talking about teachers' pay, and there are reports that the body that you were talking about are going to recommend a 5% pay rise, which, of course, would end up being another real terms pay cut if you look at inflation as well. How much would a Labour government increase teachers' pay by?
Well, let's wait and see what they say. We don't know that yet. I'm not going to put a figure on that, and I'm not going to cut across that negotiating process. The level of pay and the figure that you put on it is incredibly important, but I know from speaking to teachers and support staff as well that there are bigger questions too around workload, and that also needs addressing as part of a wider discussion.
I guess I understand you don't want to cut across, blah, 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 but at the same time, what is the policy from Labour? What would be a reasonable pay rise for teachers?
Well, if you look at our record from government, we delivered consistent, stable pay rises for teachers and for support staff.
I'm not asking about the record, I'm asking about what would be your policy. You want to be the Education Secretary. What would be a reasonable pay rise for teachers?
Well, I think you do have to judge us on our record. If I were Education Secretary, I would be working with trade unions representing teachers and support staff to make sure that they are properly supported, both in terms of pay and in terms of workload. That is also why we've set out that we would end the tax breaks that private schools enjoy. We think that's completely wrong and out of step, and that we would put that money into making sure that all of our children in our brilliant state schools get the best possible start in life.
OK. Just to quickly end by talking a little bit about the Conservative Party leadership election. What candidate would you be most worried about fighting in a general election?
I'm not worried about any of them. I don't think we've got anything to fear from any of the candidates. And the reason for that is that all of them have propped up Boris Johnson and the Conservative government for 12 years now. And over those 12 years, what have we seen happen in our country? We've seen our vital public services, whether that's schools or hospitals, get worse and worse. Britain is completely stuck. You can't renew your passport. More and more people going to food banks, rising levels of child poverty, growth at a terrible level, a consistent failure to grow our economy. And what are they all doing? An arms race around tax cuts, none of them prepared to set out what that means, how many teachers, how many doctors, what will be the impact on our public services. They should be asked those questions around what that means and how they will deliver it. Labour, however, we've been clear that when we put forward any policy, we'll be clear about how we fund it. So today we are reiterating our call for the government to end those tax breaks that private schools enjoy and to put that money into state education. Will any of those candidates make that commitment?
OK, thank you very much indeed. Bridget Phillipson there for the Labour Party on the show today.